We got one going right now.
Russell Gahagan here from Russell's Fishing Tech. Today we're going to talk about the different types of weighted lines that we use out on the Great Lakes. And when I say weighted lines, I mean a line that's weighted on its own, so it has a sink ratio, a dive curve by itself, without adding any other types of weights to it. And there's three different kinds that are used primarily out on the Great Lakes for trout and salmon. The first kind is Leadcore. This is a spool of Blood Run Leadcore, happens to be 27 pound. There's 18 pound, 27 pound, and 36 pound Leadcore. 18 and 27 seem to be the most popular, with 27 being probably the single most popular out on the Great Lakes. If you haven't used Leadcore before, what Leadcore is it's basically a piece of lead, almost like pencil lead, like you would have in your pencil that you would reload as a kid, and there's a sheath over it. So that sheath is like a covering, and it's colored. You can see in this particular case, it's red right here. And the reason that they color it is because most people go by how many colors they put out. So one color of Leadcore is 30 feet or 10 yards, whichever way you want to look at it, and dives about 5 feet down in the water column. So one more time, one color of Leadcore equals 30 feet of line and 5 foot of depth. So if you let out 5 colors of Leadcore, you have a reel set up at 5 colors of lead, and you let 5 colors of Leadcore out, you're going to be down about 25 feet, because it's 5 feet per color. Leadcore is a great type of line to use for steelhead fishing, for close to shore fishing, for salmon. You know, I really like to use Leadcore primarily up in that top 25 feet of the water column. I don't own any Leadcores that are longer than 5 colors. I know there's a lot of guys that like 7 colors and 10 colors and stuff like that, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. I just feel there's better options, but I do really like Leadcores for like 1 through 5 colors, because they're a nice stealthy presentation to get the baits away from the boat, and they work really, really well up in that top 25 foot of the water column. The second, and probably the most popular of all of them, I would say today, in today's world, is copper. And here's a spool of Blood Run copper. This one's a 45 pound, which is the most popular. There's 32 pound and 45 pound. 45 is the most popular. This is a 100-foot spool here. But basically, what's important to know is there's 2 types of copper. There's copper and there's super copper. On Lake Michigan here, super copper is by far the most popular. And what super copper is the silver colored stuff, which is what we have here on this spool right here, this silver colored stuff. It's coated, so it's the regular copper line, from what I understand, with a coating on it that makes it a little bit easier to work with, a little more pliable, and that seems to be why it's the most popular here on Lake Michigan. On Lake Ontario, on the other hand, which I got a lot of followers on Lake Ontario, and there's a lot of awesome fishermen and fishing out there, they still seem to be, somewhat on the original copper line, which is actually a copper color. Blood Run sells well out there with their super copper, but also there's some other brands like Atomic and some of those that are still selling the original copper line, which is an actual copper color. Both have about the same dive curve. Both work just fine. Both are more than adequate to use. From my understanding and my personal use, I think the super copper is just a little bit easier to use. It's a little more pliable, but I think it's really personal preference. Either one works fine. So the difference between the copper and Leadcore is copper sinks quite a bit more, and it's also a little bit more tough to use. What I mean by that is, with Leadcore, you can basically go like this and nothing will happen. You're not going to wreck the lead or anything like that. It's totally fine. If you do that with copper, you potentially could break the strands, make it weak, and it may break. You have to be very, very delicate with copper. You have to be very careful with it. If you let it out too fast, it'll bird's nest in the reel, things like that. So with copper, for example, so I said before with 5 colors of Leadcore, that was, they're 30 feet per color, so that's 150 feet of line you have out to get down 25 feet. If you'd put out 150 feet of copper, you'd be down about 35 feet, give or take. So you can see that the copper has, a little bit deeper dive curve than the lead core, which is why I like to use lead core down to about 5 colors of lead, 25 feet down, and then after that, I go to copper because I can let less line out to get the same depth or more depth, obviously, which is what I'm looking to ultimately get. And then kind of new to the party over the course of the last few years would be the Torpedo weighted steel, which has become very, very popular. You can kind of see here it's got more of a dark color than the copper, but according to Torpedo, which I agree with, the dive curve on the weighted steel is about the same as copper. There's some advantages and some disadvantages to the weighted steel. The advantages to the weighted steel is more pliable, more like lead core, in the sense that you can take the weighted steel, see if I can do that here, you can take the weighted steel and do what I was doing with lead core before. You can see I can go like this with it, and it's totally fine. It straightens right back out. So I set up a lot of new customers, fishermen that are new to running copper or lead core or any of that stuff with weighted steel. I feel like it's a much better setup for them because they'll have more success, have less tangles, have less issues with the weighted steel than they would with the copper. They have about the same dive curve, like I said before. Here's where I feel that they're a little bit different. Because of the way the weighted steel is built versus the copper, copper is, I say it's kind of like a tank going through the desert. It's steady, smooth all the time. I don't think the copper moves around in the water column very much. If you're running a 300-foot copper, I think you're getting down about that 70-foot range, and it's down about 70 foot all the time. Pretty much no matter what the variables around it are, it's down about 70 foot. Huge speed differences like 1.8 miles an hour to 3.0 miles an hour could definitely change that dive curve, but currents and things like that aren't going to affect it a ton when it comes to copper. Now, the weighted steel, because of the way it's made, because of the way it's pliable, the fact that it doesn't bird's nest up, and it's not as easy to kink and wreck as the copper, it moves around in the column more like lead core. In my opinion, weighted steel is basically very similar to lead core with just a deeper dive curve. If guys like lead core, I think they could replace all their lead core with weighted steel and get deeper. The difference there is, I think because of the way it's built, it moves around a lot. It whips in the water like this. There's other people that talk a lot about how lead core whips around in the water. When you turn, when you pick up your speed, when you drop your speed, just subtle changes even can make a big difference in the way that lead core moves through the water. Not as much with copper, but you do get that with weighted steel. So I have a lot of customers ask, and a lot of people message me about, should I set my reel up with weighted steel or should I set it up with copper? Totally up to you. It's personal preference. Both of them work great. If you're sort of new to it and you don't want to have an issue with tangles, backlashed reels, wrecked line, I would probably say go with the Torpedo weighted steel. If you're, been fishing the lake quite a while, you're a pretty avid fisherman, you're pretty confident in your skills to get the line out and in without any issues, and you want to make sure you know where you're at on that depth, and you got confidence in copper because your buddies have it or whatever, and that's what they use, so you want to be able to network back and forth, then I would say go with copper. All three of these types of lines work great. They're all quality products, whether it's the Blood Run branded lead core or Blood Run's copper or Torpedo weighted steel. These are your three options that you can put on reels today out on the Great Lakes to get down in the water column. If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me. Check the link below. Check for a link below to buy any of these products. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button for more of my videos. Good luck.